Hi friends, I'm Gwen. Welcome back to Talk Bookish to me. Today I am coming to you solo for the very first time. It's just me and you. I thought instead of only sharing what I'm currently reading, I could share the last book I read, what I'm currently reading, and what's up next, since today's episode is focused on ways and tips and tricks to help you prioritize your TBR. The last book that I read was The Ravens by Cass Morgan and Danielle Page. It's a YA dark contemporary fantasy novel about a prestigious sorority of witches and two girls caught up in a world of sinister magic and betrayal. The follow-up, it's a duology actually, is The Monarchs, and it is expected to release January 11th of 2022. So I probably will go ahead and pick that up at some point. I'm currently reading The Ex-Hex by Rachel Hawkins, written as Erin Sterling. This was my book of the month pick for October. It's a light and fun paranormal romantic comedy featuring witches and hexes gone wrong. And next up, I'm thinking about picking up White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson. We did mention this book on the podcast when we did the Grown book discussion. So it's a YA psychological thriller and modern take on the haunted house story. The cover is gorgeous, and I'm just really anticipating that I'm going to love this book. After you listen to today's episode, head over to my Instagram at Talk Bookish Podcast and let me know what your last book, current read, and next book are. I'll try to come up with a fancy little template that you can fill in and share on your own Instagram, but make sure when you share it to tag me so I can see. Today's episode is for the readers who look at their TBR pile and see Mount Everest and have no climbing gear, yet still want to reach the summit. You know, the reader who buys more books than they'll probably ever read in their lifetime. Or maybe you're looking for new ways to manage your TBR now so it doesn't get out of control. Today, I am sharing some ways to help you make a dent in that pile of books. The first step is to see what you have. You need to take inventory. I find the best way to do this, although it might be a lot of work, is to take all of the books off of your shelves, gather all of the piles of books laying around your house, and make one big, huge, messy pile. And then from that pile, you're going to start to separate it into read books and unread books. Now, while your books are off your shelves, get out the duster, do a quick swipe, and then you can go ahead and organize your read books back onto your newly cleaned shelves. So now that you just have all of your unread books laying there, you're probably going to want to grab a snack because the next task is where the real work begins. Do you have a snack? I do not. However, let's go ahead and get started. With the remaining unread books, you're going to divide them into 3 categories. So you're basically going to make this one huge pile of books that you have unread into 3 smaller stacks. So you have category number 1, which is books you want to read eventually. Like when you retire, you have an extra long vacation, or you're craving something particular. This category is also for books you want to keep in your collection, but will possibly never read. For example, that old worn copy of The Secret Garden that's been passed down from your grandmother, field guides, research books, things like that. So that's all category 1 books. Category 2 is books you're no longer interested in reading. In other words, it's time to be honest with yourself and get rid of the books you know you're not going to read. You no longer have interest in reading, or maybe books that you have multiple copies of, books you forgot about, that sort of thing. And here's a tip. If you have to reread the synopsis to remind yourself why you bought it, chances are it belongs in this category. Next, I recommend getting a box or some bags and packing up those books right away and moving them to another room, preferably somewhere near the front door, so you actually get rid of them instead of them sneaking back onto your shelves. The remaining books are Category 3, also known as your actual TBR. But before we tackle that TBR, take some time to reshelve your Category 1 books, the eventual books, maybe even get rid of those Category 2 books, that unhaul pile. And once you have those taken care of, you're actually ready to move on to prioritizing your TBR. We're moving and grooving now. You can take a quick water break after all of that hard work. Then we're going to move in to the next stage. So after you've taken inventory and made a decision about which books actually belong on your TBR, which I hope everybody that's listening to a bookish podcast knows that a TBR is your to be read pile. That should have been clear from the beginning. You need to make a few smaller stacks according to your particular reading style. So we're only talking about your TBR now, this Category 3 of books. You've weeded out the ones that you don't want. You've weeded out the ones that are for someday. Now we're only talking about the ones that is your actual TBR. And you have to think about how you are as a reader. Do you mood read? Do you have books you have to read for work, a readathon, a buddy read, or do you make monthly TBRs or seasonal TBRs? What immediately sticks out to you? What are your most anticipated reads? These are all things you should consider. But your goal is to divide your entire TBR into more manageable chunks or stacks. Remember, this is only the books from Category 3. If you're a mood reader, maybe you can organize your books and have stacks dedicated to a particular subject matter or genre or theme, or maybe just like books by the same author. If you have reading goals, make a stack with those books you're prioritizing and pull from that stack exclusively. If you're wanting to read 10 classics, put all your classics together, and when you're going to read a classic, pull from your classic pile. So you're dividing out all of these books according to your particular reading style. The main goal here is to make the books that you want to read easily accessible when you need them or you're in a particular reading mood. Now that you have your TBR books all organized, it's time to make sure you are prioritizing them. Here are some helpful hints and tips and tricks you can use to do that. And here's a secret. The longer a book sits on your TBR pile, the odds of it being read drops drastically. So make sure you are mindfully adding new books and reading your older acquisitions first. If you keep passing over a book on your TBR in favor of something that you just bought, it might be time to let that book go. Keep your TBR visible. This is the reason that I like to separate my read books from my unread books. If you have no idea what you're supposed to be reading because you have to go like hunting for a book to read, you're wasting your reading time. So find a place that works for you, but keep them visible. The next step is probably the simplest in theory, and that's to grab a book and start reading. When you're done with that one, you grab another and you read it, and so on. But believe me, I know it's easy to get distracted by books on Bookstagram and Book Talk and BookTube and all sorts of things. And I'm not suggesting a book buying ban, but I do suggest taking a bit of time to think about it before immediately adding it to your cart and hitting that buy now button. Is it actually a book you're genuinely interested in? Or is it that FOMO, that fear of missing out? I rarely, if ever, immediately buy a book, but I do add them to an ever-growing wish list. And from time to time, I cull and erase things from my wish list that I'm no longer interested in or no longer want to read. Again, do what works for you. You could use a spreadsheet or something like that, but I suggest not buying into the early hype, especially if it's a book in a genre you don't typically read, an author you've never read anything by, or something like that. Buy books, take chances, but be cautious. Beware book sales and discounted books to a degree. This is the area that still lures me into its clutches. So please do as I say and not as I do with this tip. Just because a book is on sale, there's a buy two, get one free deal going on, or you see it in a thrift store, doesn't mean it needs to come home with you. Refer to my previous tip about figuring out if it's a book you're genuinely interested in. This is another reason why my wish list comes in handy, because if I run across a book in a thrift store that I've already vetted and thought about, I know that I can snag it up guilt-free. Again, you do you, but I can't even begin to count the amount of books I bought solely because I got them cheap and wasn't really interested in them. I am really trying to improve my mindset with book sales and discounted books still. Hopefully, it gets better and better as the years go on. Then it's all about making reading a part of your lifestyle, which if you're listening to today's podcast, chances are you're already doing this. But if you'd like some tips in this area, check out the episode, How to Read More During the Academic Year or Anytime from Season 1. I'd also like to use this opportunity to stress the value of a DNF, a book you did not finish and plan to not finish. I know this is a tricky thing for some of you. It was for me for a very long time. And your first DNF is gonna be rough. You're gonna waver back and forth and you're gonna put it back onto your shelf thinking you're gonna pick it up again very, very soon. But then you're not. And it's going to sit there and start collecting dust. And every time you see it, it's going to remind you that it's unread. And essentially, it's turned into an unfinished task. DNFs are tricky like that. So instead of putting it back on your shelf, unless it's literally something you're going to pick up next, consider putting it in a bin, a box, or a bag in your closet out of the way. If you're not back in that bag digging out that book in a month or two, chances are it's time to let that book go. Don't look in the container, just donate it. I know this is hard. I know this is crazy. Just trust me, because you don't want to allow yourself the opportunity to talk yourself into keeping it for the cycle to start all over again. And then the good thing about your first DNF is it gets easier and easier to spot books to get rid of, books you're not enjoying, and instead you're spending your time reading books that are making you happy. As I always say, life is too short to read bad books. So here are a few quick tips to help you along your journey. Set reading goals, create a reading space in your home for reading. If a book isn't for you, don't be afraid to set it aside, and turn off or silence your mobile devices during your reading time. So you're not scrolling, you're just reading. And then make sure that you're occasionally going through your TBR to remove the books that you've changed your mind about. I do this quite often myself, but I usually do a really thorough cleanse at the end of the year to ensure that my TBR going into the new year is only the books I am still super excited about reading. So what do you say? Is it time to read? I think so. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode, How to Prioritize Your TBR. Hopefully, you can get your TBR in tip-top shape for 2022 and actually make the books you have a priority moving forward. If all else fails, send up the bat signal and I'll do my best to help. I'll be back on November 22nd with my friend Haley for some holiday book recommendations. It's an episode you're not going to want to miss. Until next time, happy reading.